looking at the inflation rate, it has increased moderately, 0.3%, as at the statistics provided for February. We're into a new month now. How will you assess the first quarter for the U.S. economy, and what are the factors you think are playing out to strengthen the U.S. economy in the first quarter, now that we are moving to the second quarter of the year?
Thank you very much indeed. I think about 3 weeks or thereabout, we spoke about the U.S. economy in this same program, and the trajectory we looked at, and the prognosis that was provided then is that there's not likely to be much in terms of the rate of inflation. What they had in February was about 3.15%. So it's just a tangential increase. I think the Federal Reserve Bank has been finding a way to see how they don't tinker with the rate so much, so that particularly from the perspective of consumer spending that has increased tremendously, but then the rate of inflation is making consumer spend in terms of disposable income that is available to the average American look a bit difficult. So they are playing around with a view not to pull those figures in a way that doesn't affect the general public. So inflation generally is seen where the price of goods are going up in a way that your disposable income can no longer get you the same value of what your money used to buy. So I think it's a great responsibility on the part of the U.S. government to find a way to maintain the rate that they currently have.
All right, so now that the U.S. economy, inflation seems to be cooling down by 0.3%, prices are not so much skyrocketing, but some want the Fed to cut rates, but the Fed says that the economy is strong enough and can wait on cuts. What's your take on that? Do you consider the stance of the Fed as reasonable?
The chair of the Federal Reserve Bank, Jerome Powell, have always maintained an instance that in spite of the challenge of the economy, the Reserve Bank will continue to see how it does not really cut rates in a way that it does not affect the economy drastically. So, but it's within the purview of the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank, Jerome Powell. His comment in the last 3 weeks has always shown that there's a likelihood that there will be no rate cuts, and that they will continue to see how they can manage the tangential level of inflation so far. I think in that regard, they are on the table, they see the data that they use. But then, if the cost of energy is still rising, then the consumer spend will continue to impact negatively on the individuals within that economy.
All right, looking at the consumer spending being on the rise, the cost of food is also on the rise, the cost of energy is also on the rise. Of course, it's a global effect, but will the accident that took place last week at the Baltimore Bridge, which has also been a setback to logistics in that area, how will this further impact the prices of food, energy, and then the cost of living in the U.S.?
That accident was a major challenge for the U.S. economy. So there's a disruption in the supply chain. To that extent, we have negative impact, but the authorities are working very hard to divert the shipment that go through that mid-Atlantic route that has been disrupted by that accident. So I think in the short term, that shock in terms of supply chain will affect the economy. But efforts are being made by the government to see how they can redirect shipments to another port that can serve the interests of the mid-Atlantic cities within the United States of America. No doubt that is a major problem, but that will be in the short term. And I hope once that bridge is built in weeks and months later, then the disruption that brought about some of those shocks will have been resolved.
So now the Fed is insistent on not cutting rates. What could be the likely implication of this on businesses when rates remain as they are for maybe another quarter or even more?
I think there will be some stability in the business arena, because the expectation was that though they expected that there will be rate cuts, but that is not likely. So within their operational management, they will be able to stay doing business within the rate that they currently are confronted with within the economy. But then, if the Federal Reserve Bank feel otherwise, and they feel that there are other issues, they may have to look at the data they have in the interest of the economy.
Let's look at what Howard said about the U.S. economy. He said, giving the federal official room to be patient, looking at the strong economic growth and performance. I'm trying to quote him now. In the recent time, as giving the Fed official rooms to be patient. He emphasized the institutional political independence of the Fed. Now, looking at this, a lot of experts and analysts have been expecting the first cut for the year, but he's saying, okay, looking at the performance of the economic growth in the last 3 months or 4 months, there's no need to be in a hurry. So it might likely not happen soon. Do you foresee happening in the second quarter, now that we're moving to the second quarter of the year? Is it likely going to happen? Some might say, okay, maybe in June, July, then we need to review it.
If you look at the trend from November 2023 up to January and up to February and March, there's some consistency in terms of the rate. So there's a likelihood, in my view, that nothing is likely to happen, particularly in an election year. The U.S. election is coming sometime in October or November this year. So why they claim some independence in terms of their operation, the political expediency cannot be underestimated within the current scheme of things. But if from November, which is over 5 months, this suspicion and this clamor for rate cuts has been there, and it has not happened in 5 months, in my view, I don't think it will happen quickly. So let's hope that maybe after the second quarter of the year, maybe there may be some consideration. But since there are some improvement in terms of the economic performance, I'm sure the rate will stay for some time, in my view.
So now that prices seem to have cooled for some months, what could be responsible for prices cooling?
I think it's a strong monetary policy and a fiscal discipline, and which we lack in our environment. So those are, in simple terms, will have been responsible for the slowdown in price. So the economic managers are in reality are in touch with the issues on ground.
When you say some of the management that are missing in Nigeria, which we lack, if I may quote you, now let's go there now.
I just make a little comparison to see that within 5 months, where the expectations that things may change, the trajectory has been okay, just a slight, very tangential in terms of percentage, just 0.8 if I remember correctly. So that's less than 1. So nothing really happened.
If you're looking at the approach, to handling some of these policies in the U.S. compared to what we have here, because you talked about doing the comparison now. Now, how will you compare this, looking at what the CBN has done in the last 1 quarter, or is the last, let me say 3 months now, because the figure for April can be out now. We have to base it on, the performance for the last 3 months.
Yes, if we extrapolate from February and March, there's a likelihood that the inflation is going to go up, because if you increase your lending rate to commercial bank, the last but one was 22.75%, and now you have 24.75%. So if the banks are getting their money at that rate, I'm assuming that the rate at which they will borrow to the real lending public will be far higher, and then that inflation rate, in my view, will likely to go up. Even if you look at January, February, and look at the food inflation and the nominal inflation, what we had was a spike in the figure. So I don't really see anything. Maybe perhaps what might help us maybe in the next 2 years is the minimum capital adequacy rate that has been increased. May show up the capitals of those banks, then the portfolio of lending will increase. Maybe that will have a long-term impact on the economy.
Now, in the case of the U.S. economy, where prices are cooling, they've been like that for a few months. And in the case of Nigeria, where prices are skyrocketing, what could be happening in one economy that is perhaps not happening in the other economy, where rates have been increased, yet in one prices are cooling, in the other prices are not cooling?
Well, it's a challenge in terms of those who manage the economy, and in this station, we have overflogged the issue of over-reliance on imports, which is one of the bane of economic performance in Nigeria. If you look at the foreign exchange market, vis-a-vis the dollar, it's troubling when you exchange your dollar for the naira over 1,350. If that will still stand. That was before the holiday Thursday, so I don't know what has happened within the holiday period. So that's troubling in the sense that food inflation is over 30-something percent. So those other people are conscious of the impact of their policy framework on the citizen. But then, why the central bank is making real efforts at trying to curtail some of the volatility in the market, but then the impact on the citizen is not seen yet. So we can only make a really good comparison between America and Nigeria. But hopefully, what the CBN is doing so far, with the naira getting stronger, let's hope that this quarter may bring a better tiding for Nigeria.
Let's look at the U.S. manufacturing sector, which absolutely contributed to the figure that you have for the first quarter. The record has it that it recorded the highest output in March, which was last month, since September 2022. Now, how sensitive is that sector to the growth of any economy, the manufacturing sector, looking at the example that played out with the U.S. in the first quarter of the year?
Manufacturing or small and medium enterprises are the engine of growth of any economy. So if you don't have manufacturing that is well strengthened in terms of production capacity that will take care of goods and services, and there's a problem. So, and that's why this over-reliance on import has always been the bane of the Nigeria economy. So on the other hand, America manufacturing is improving from time to time, so they're able to curtail the rate of inflation. The local industries are operating optimally. Even if you look at the service sector, tourism, restaurants, and some of those sectors contributed tangibly to what happened in March. So if we want to draw lessons from that climb, we must support local industry. Once we're able to do that, then the rate of inflation and the cost of living will reduce drastically.
So the high borrowing cost that is on now, since the rates have not been reduced and Feds want to keep the rate the way they are, still watching, not believing that inflation has been firmly handled. So for businesses and mortgages, those who have taken mortgages and will be repairing, what will be applied while the Fed watches till when they're convinced it's a good time to cut the rates?
Yeah, the challenge there is that they have a system in place. Once you have a challenge in terms of your mortgage repayment, what you can do is to approach your mortgage institutions to find a way to rework a new repayment plan that suits your current economic reality. So those options are there, and I'm sure that mortgage operators and those who have taken mortgages will find a way to rework based on the current reality, and the new financing arrangement will be done based on the current inflation rate.
Let's look at what the head of the Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S. also said. Now, regarding the rate, he says, Powell says, it's a two-way thing, like a two-way traffic. So the first one is, if they decide to cut rates, it may be premature, and by the time the inflation increases again, they may have to revert and then have to increase rates. Now, if they wait too long on cutting rate, according to him, there's also a risk that they wait too long, and in that case, it could be unnecessary, unneeded damage to the economy and perhaps the labor market. So what could happen if the rates are kept for too long before they're cut? By too long, that could be the entire year, waiting till like December or even after the elections.
I think that was a diplomatic statement from a leader. That statement is neither
here nor there.
Yes. So what he's trying to say is that we are here looking at the data that we have. We cannot be pressured to make some decision based on some financial analyst speculation. But then, if we must make this decision, these are the implications. Nevertheless, this is not the right timing to make that decision. That's a very diplomatic statement from a leader. But then, if it must happen, that decision will be made. So let's leave it at that diplomatic posturing by Jerome Powell, who made that statement. I think that's just a diplomatic statement of saying you cannot pressure us to make some decisions. Once those decisions will be made based on the data, and at that particular point in time, they will make their call.
Now let's look at the cost of housing and then energy, which has been mounting serious pressure on the consumer price index for the U.S. What will you expect, maybe in the short time or in the interim, for the U.S. government to do to ease this pressure, because it's very crucial. An average American now feels this pain when it comes to the cost of living, talking about housing, and then energy needs.
I think in terms of Blessing...
I'm aware that subsidies...
Yes, I think Blessing has a question that is related to this, so you're taking it from another perspective. For housing, there's already a provision made within the mortgage institutions. So once there are pressure for your inability to meet up with your mortgage obligation, you can always come to do what you call repackaging till when things get better. So the dominance is that people who prefer to spend money in terms of buying groceries and some other household item that will keep them surviving. But then the government equally have a window in terms of providing some form of subsidies to the mortgage operator that will have shocks from the current rise in the prices of housing in the United States of America. So there are safeguards or safety nets that are put in place by government and even the institutions themselves to repackage those mortgages so that the impact does not really weigh down the consumers.
So let's move away from the U.S. to Japan, where the Japanese yen has showed signs of weakness and authorities are considering some form of intervention to uphold the value of the Japanese yen. What could be happening to Japan's currency?
Vis-a-vis the dollar, I think there's a major problem, and the financial analysts are speculating that in the last 34 years, this is the first time the Japanese yen is weakened vis-a-vis the dollar. The implication is that the economy, to a very large extent, has weakened in terms of the ability to sell some of those manufactured goods to some other countries. So this is a global phenomenon. But then the officials are saying that within a few weeks, they'll be able to see how they can restore the economy back to where it was. So I think it's just a momentary dislocation that has happened to the Japanese yen in the last 34 years. The last time they had this kind of shock vis-a-vis the dollar was in 1990.
Now, compared to the Japanese yen, the US dollar is getting stronger. But if you look at the decision being made by the Fed now to keep the rate the way it is, perhaps unlike what is playing out in Nigeria, where the benchmark interest rate is at 24.75. So let's talk about the issue of loan repayment default, which might likely occur. Analysts have predicted might likely occur in Nigeria because of the benchmark interest rate increase. But in the case of the US, because the dollar is getting stronger now, and then the Fed had decided to keep the rate at between 5.0 and 5.3 now, which has been consistent for months now, do you foresee any form of loan repayment default, or could be on the decline this time around?
No, the default will be there, but then the system has already have an inbuilt mechanism.
What I'm saying, what would be the magnitude of the default compared to an economy where you have to benchmark to be at 24.75%?
Yeah, that's the point I'm trying to speak to. I'm saying that in that environment, even though the shocks are there, but then the system already have an inbuilt mechanism that will take care of certain shocks already built even into the loan offer where there are defaults. From your drawn down date, they will tell you if there are problems, you can approach the institution to try and do a repayment package that will suit your current reality. On the other hand here, even when the rates are a bit normal, the rates of defaults are equally very high here. And I think it has to do with the credit appraisal mechanism and the way the executives of bank make decisions based on some other personal interest when they make a final decision on the lending portfolio. So the challenge here is that the banks, based on their compromised nature, I use that word advisedly, in terms of when they package loans. So sometimes loan officers, based on the parameters of the 5 C's of lending, when it gets to top executive, because they have some interest, they undermine some of the appraisers from the lower levels of credit officer, and they make those decisions because they have interest. So sometimes some of those loans become doubtful, and they will write some of them off. So the challenge will be more here now that the interest rates have gone up, and that will be a major challenge. But thank God that the CBN has woken up to his responsibility, trying to see how they can increase the capital adequacy ratio, which is one of the mandates of the central bank, to see how they can show up the amount of money that banks should have as minimum capital, so that the lending will increase from that perspective.
All right, going back now to Japan, where the Japanese yen shows signs of weakness against the dollar. It's at the lowest after a 4-year period. Now, so the weak yen means export from Japan will be cheaper, but what it then means on the reverse is that imports and energy costs would be higher, which will increase the cost of living and inflation. What can be done at this point, and how do you think, for how long do you think the Japanese yen will experience this trouble?
If you look at the manufacturing ecosystem in Japan, they are very strong in terms of manufacturing. I'm sure this shock will just be momentary, but the financial authority will find a way to balance the challenge. So if you want to improve on that, they will reduce some pricing in terms of the exports. So some money can come in that can boost the economy. But then the monetary policy regime will put some policy in place that will help to stabilize the economy. On the other hand, the fiscal regime as well will find a way to see how they can balance out so that the negative impact in terms of cost of living for the average Japanese will reduce. But then, like the officials have said, that is going to be momentary. That means they're already putting mechanisms in place. So a few days from now, we'll see how that plays out in terms of how quickly they can reverse those trends.
Now, talking about the performance of the Japanese yen, I would like to bring into this discussion a statement made by a top currency official, which he said the recent weakness is odd and out of line with the current economic fundamentals. Is that contradictory? He's saying, okay, the figure that we've had is in contrary to the realities economic fundamentals. That's the top currency official, just like our CBN, a top official saying.
Yeah, I think that statement, if I got it correctly, is saying this is very unusual from the Japanese economy. That is one of the very strong economy of the world. So what could have happened? Where is that snap? So, and the officials are saying that this weakness will be corrected quickly. So it means that based on their economic projection.
It's trying to express the shock.
Yeah, that based on the projection and the outlook, the Japanese economy is strong. So why will be in a few days, there's a weakness vis-a-vis the dollar. And that the officials are saying that this odd, which is unusual in the last 34 years, will be corrected quickly. So they need to do, like Blessing asked earlier, they'll find a way to reduce some export pricing in some of those essential commodities that are very good at, or products, in such a way that they can find a way to reverse that shock. So I think that guy's observation is okay, but then the projections are positive, but then there's something wrong that is not open to the public as we speak.
So this shock that the Japanese yen is having against the dollar, leading to its weakness, do you think it will form a reason or a strong point for Japan to rally around the BRICS nation in their move for the de-dollarization of the world's economy?
Well, that may not be in the short term, but maybe because of economic union, economic blocks, as a basis of international relation. If the Japanese government consider it as an interest area, they might join the BRICS nation in the nearest future. But for now, this shock is momentary, and I think they will concentrate more on how to address that distortion in the economy, as it were.
Are there lessons for the Japan authority looking at the comparison? We've been doing this now between the US and Japan, looking at the strength of the dollar, the weakness of the Japanese yen. Are there lessons looking at the approach to the economy and some of the indices that the US have recorded in the last 3 months? Are there lessons that...
Is it for the Japanese government? I don't think they really see much lesson because the Japanese economy is equally strong. This shock or distortion that is momentary doesn't really show that they have economic management challenges. And I'm sure it's something that will be done in a few days from now. But if you are saying whether we have lessons to learn from the US and Japan, I think that would have been an appropriate question in terms of how those economies are managed. But in terms of comparison between Japan and the US, I don't really see so much lessons to be taken from the US economy, in my view.
In the case of Japan, where they have lots of exports, but just that because the yen is weaker, so that means cheaper export for them, but it's going to be more expensive imports. So I'm thinking that to shore up, they may be doing more of exports than of imports at the moment. Now, bringing that home to Nigeria, where Nigeria is largely dependent on imports, in a situation like this, what could Nigeria learn from Japan?
What we can learn from them is core manufacturing. They improve on their manufacturing over the years. So there's a low reliance on imports. Rather, you have more exports. But our case is that almost everything is imported. So you have pressure on your external reserve. You have pressure vis-a-vis your local currency and that of the dollar. So until we're able to reverse the trend in terms of core manufacturing, so there should be more investment a local industry. There should be protection for local industry, because some of those countries that we're talking about have a protection mechanism that support local industry, and that's why manufacturing has improved over the years. So our lesson is that we should support our local industry. We should just import what is key in terms of what we aid the development of manufacturing in the country, and we must consume manufactured products. So when we look inward, then over time, they will get stronger as an economy.
Now, quickly, as we wrap up, the issue of standardization, improving the standards of goods produced. While there's advocacy for consumption of goods produced in Nigeria by Nigerians, there's also the advocacy for Nigeria to increase its exports. So if Nigeria's currency is not so strong at this moment, it means that exports from Nigeria are cheaper and should be preferred if the standards are if the goods are up to international standards. So what can be done to improve standards of goods produced in Nigeria?
Already regulatory framework and agencies that are supposed to be dealing with standardization of products and services. So what is key, those agencies must do their job. NAFDAC, Standard Organization of Nigeria, some of the consumer protection agencies must find a way to see how manufacturing, that's what you call GMP, good manufacturing practices. Once you're able to adhere to GMP, the production lines are supervised, the product specifications are there, in line with global best practices, as you mentioned. Once you're able to put people in check, this will improve on the final products that are manufactured here, so they can compete first and foremost, within the continent of Africa, they are able to take those goods elsewhere. So standardization is very key. Then manufacturing must equally find a way to do what you call self-regulatory role in terms of their practices and standards, even before the regulatory regimes come in to look at what they are doing. Once we're able to perfect those, and this level of high level of corruption between the officials of government who look the other way because they've been giving money under the table and don't look at standardization as it's supposed to be. And once they are substandard goods, they should be removed from the production line, and that will help to improve eventually. So it's a two-way traffic. Local manufacturing must meet up with the standards in terms of manufacturing. Then those who have supervisory role must equally do their bit so that we'll be able to have standard products across Africa.
Talking about the manufacturing sector, you agree with me that the greatest challenge has to be the issue of funding of finance. Looking at the benchmark interest rate now, the rate of 24.75%, which will likely discourage borrowing, How will they cope? Because we are laying emphasis on the manufacturing sector now, looking at what happened in the US, the reference to Japan, and also let's talk about Nigeria now, which is this greatest challenge. But at this crucial time,
the point is that
how will they survive?
The point is that the cost of fund, which you mentioned, is very critical to the manufacturing sector. But regrettably, once the cost of fund is high, and the cost of manufacturing of a product is high, the consumer suffers because they will have to pass the cost to the consumer. So the government has a responsibility here to find a way to see how they can support industry, providing windows, some tax incentive, some holidays to manufacturing. So even when the cost of funding in terms of bringing shipment of equipment, in terms of manufacturing, the cost of energy is high, then those windows provided from the government be able to reduce the shock from their borrowing. Then the consumer may not suffer drastically from the impact of high funding for manufacturing.
All right, thank you so much, Sam Orovwuje, Director, Center for Public Policy, doing justice to the issues as we looked at the economic trends of many countries, major countries, if you like. We talked about the US, talked about China, talked about Japan, and Nigeria. It's been wonderful having you on the show.
My pleasure, Blessing. Thank you.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.